The courthouse garage was quiet, the kind of silence that hums before judgment. Only the faint click of heels echoed through the cold concrete as a black woman in a navy coat made her way toward her car. She carried no robe, no nameplate, just the quiet dignity of someone who'd spent a lifetime earning respect she rarely received. Then came the sound, a car door slamming, voices cutting through the stillness like blades. A white couple approached, faces twisted with irritation and entitlement. They accused her of taking their spot, their tone sharp, soaked in something far older than anger. She tried to explain, calm and steady, but their rage only grew louder, crueler, more public. The man's hand gripped her arm. The woman's insult landed harder than the shove. She didn't fight back. She simply watched, eyes steady, expression unreadable, as the security camera above blinked to life, capturing every word, every slur. Minutes later, she stood in silence beside her car, dusting off her sleeve. She looked up once more, not at them, but at the courthouse steps leading to her courtroom. Because in just 40 minutes, she wouldn't be the woman they tried to humiliate. She'd be the one deciding their fate. She walked up the courthouse steps with the same calm rhythm she'd practiced for years, not out of habit, but out of necessity. Every measured breath, every unflinching step was armor. Inside those walls, she was the Honorable Judge Naomi Carter, 22 years on the bench, former civil rights attorney and the quiet pillar of a courthouse that had seen more verdicts than apologies. But this morning felt heavier. The sting of the garage incident hadn't left her skin. She could still feel the man's grip, the hiss of the woman's words, the echo of disgust hidden beneath politeness. Naomi had spent decades teaching herself to rise above such things, yet here it was again, casual cruelty delivered in a parking space dispute. She wondered, not for the first time, how often power disguised itself as prejudice. As she entered her chambers, sunlight spilled through the tall windows, brushing across certificates and framed photos, her law school graduation, her parents on their porch in Alabama, and a faded newspaper clipping from her first case defending a young man wrongfully accused. Those reminders grounded her. They whispered the truth she'd built her life around. You are not what they think you are. You are what you choose to be. Her clerk, Daniel, knocked softly and entered with the morning docket. Full schedule, Judge Carter. 3 hearings before lunch. She nodded, scanning the files, her mind sharpening. But as she flipped through the pages, one case name froze her. A petty assault charge, 2 defendants, Mark and Ellen Porter. Her pen stopped mid-air. The same names, the same couple. For a moment, the courthouse clock seemed to stop ticking. Naomi exhaled slowly, steadying the storm rising inside her. Fate, it seemed, had a peculiar sense of timing. The woman they'd mocked and manhandled in a garage was now the one who would determine their immediate future. She said nothing. Didn't mention it to Daniel. Didn't let a flicker of reaction betray her. Judges didn't have the luxury of impulse, only of principle. But beneath the calm exterior, 1,000 thoughts flickered. Would they recognize her? Would they even remember her face? Or had she been invisible enough for their comfort that morning? Courtroom 2B filled as the session began. Reporters weren't present. It was a routine day, unremarkable on paper. Yet for Naomi, every sound, the rustle of papers, the squeak of shoes, the murmur of bailiffs, seemed to carry more weight than usual. When the defendants were escorted in, her gaze met theirs for the first time since the garage. The recognition didn't come immediately. Mark Porter's arrogance faltered only when she lifted her gavel and spoke the standard words. Court is now in session, the Honorable Judge Naomi Carter presiding. The color drained from Ellen's face. Mark blinked, confused, his mouth slightly open, as if the world had just flipped upside down. Naomi's tone remained steady, professional, detached. But her presence alone dismantled the illusion of superiority they'd carried like armor. As testimonies began, she listened, really listened. The case wasn't about her. It was about justice. Yet the irony of life had never felt sharper. She watched them fidget, shifting blame, their voices suddenly small and uncertain. She maintained neutrality. Years of training made it effortless. But inside, she observed something fascinating. The moment prejudice met consequence, arrogance turned into apology. During recess, she sat in her chambers, hands folded, eyes distant. Her assistant asked if she wanted coffee. She declined. Instead, she looked out the window at the same parking lot that had become the morning's battlefield. She thought of her parents again, her father, who once said, "Child, the world will try to measure you with broken rulers. Don't ever let them define your height." Naomi smiled faintly. She hadn't realized until now how much that lesson had shaped her. The robe she wore wasn't a shield. It was a reminder. A reminder that dignity isn't granted. It's maintained. As court resumed, the defendant's attorney fumbled through arguments. Naomi noted every inconsistency, every deflection. She didn't seek revenge. She sought balance. Justice wasn't about payback. It was about restoration. But as the couple glanced nervously at her, it became clear that this trial wasn't just legal. It was moral. By noon, whispers spread across the courthouse. Some clerks already knew. The rumor of what had happened in the garage was circulating. Yet Naomi kept her focus unbroken. Her power wasn't in exposing them publicly. It was in showing the difference between what they expected from her and what she chose to be. When she adjourned the morning session, the courtroom emptied slowly. The couple avoided eye contact as they left, their earlier confidence replaced by uneasy silence. Naomi gathered her papers, removed her glasses, and allowed herself one long breath. Tomorrow, she would deliver the verdict. But tonight, she'd go home and reflect, not on anger, but on grace. Because the true strength of power isn't how loud it can speak, but how quietly it can stand. The evening rain began before she reached home, turning the city into a haze of silver reflections. Naomi drove in silence, windshield wipers marking time like a slow metronome. The courthouse lights faded in the rearview mirror, but the day clung to her, every stare, every word from that garage replaying in fragments. Inside her apartment, the quiet was both comfort and confrontation. Books lined the walls, photos of her late husband and daughter on the mantel. She poured a cup of tea, letting the steam fog the glass window before her. From that fog, the morning's scene rose again. Mark's smirk, Ellen's sneer, the way they had looked at her as though she were trespassing in her own space. For years, Naomi had sentenced men who wore hatred like a badge. But this felt different, personal, unfiltered. It wasn't a criminal act of passion. It was the quiet venom of prejudice, ordinary and daily. That, she thought, was the most dangerous kind. On the coffee table lay tomorrow's case file. She opened it slowly, flipping through statements, police reports, and witness notes. The evidence was damning. Surveillance footage, corroborating testimony from a parking attendant, and the couple's weak attempt to justify their aggression as misunderstanding. Yet beneath the ink and legal jargon, Naomi saw something deeper, a snapshot of how arrogance collapses when truth demands a mirror. Her phone buzzed. A message from Daniel. "Judge, just FYI, the press caught wind of the garage incident. Someone leaked the security clip. It's spreading fast." Naomi closed her eyes. She could already imagine the headlines. "Judge victim of racial assault, presides over her attacker's case." The media storm would twist it, chew it, sell it. And through it all, she'd still have to stay composed, because justice couldn't afford to look emotional. She turned off her phone and returned to the window. Across the street, city lights shimmered on wet pavement. She remembered her mother's voice. "Baby, you don't win by shouting louder. You win by standing taller." That night, she didn't sleep much. By morning, the courthouse steps buzzed with quiet curiosity. Staff whispered. Bailiffs avoided eye contact. Cameras hovered near the entrance like vultures. Yet when Naomi entered through the side door, her face was unreadable. Her robe hung perfectly pressed. Her steps carried no hesitation. In the courtroom, the defendants sat stiffly beside their attorney. They looked smaller now, fragile, exposed. The world had seen what they'd done, and there was no unseeing it. Naomi's gavel struck once, echoing through the hall like thunder. "Proceed," she said calmly. The prosecution began, methodical and unrelenting. The footage was played in silence. The confrontation, the insults, the shove. Gasps rippled across the courtroom as words once whispered in arrogance now echoed through public record. Ellen lowered her head. Mark stared straight ahead, jaw tight, pretending composure. Their lawyer spoke of momentary frustration, of parking confusion, but the video made their excuses sound hollow. Naomi watched without flinching. Every insult she'd endured that morning now replayed under fluorescent courtroom light, yet she refused to let emotion become spectacle. She wasn't there for vindication. She was there to uphold the balance between wrongdoing and consequence. The defense argued remorse. They painted the couple as law-abiding citizens with no prior record, victims of social tension. It was the same old narrative, racism rebranded as misunderstanding. During recess, Naomi returned to her chambers. A court reporter followed, asking for comment. She declined. Alone again, she looked at her reflection in the mirror behind her desk. The woman staring back wasn't angry anymore. She was resolute. This case, she realized, wasn't about two people lashing out. It was about what happens when accountability meets the mirror of privilege. It was about the millions who endure insults they can't report, who swallow pain just to make it through another day. The second half of the session began with testimonies. The parking attendant took the stand, a young man named Carlos, nervous but clear. "She didn't do anything, ma'am," he said, eyes darting toward Naomi. They lost it. Started yelling. "I told them to stop." Naomi listened carefully, her face impassive but her heart heavy. His testimony confirmed what the footage already showed. Yet his nervousness reminded her how fear trickles downward, how witnesses often suffer in silence too. When the defense had their turn, Ellen broke down in tears. She claimed shame, regret, misunderstanding. But Naomi had spent decades discerning genuine remorse from courtroom performance. The tears were real, but they weren't for the woman they'd hurt. They were for themselves, for the crumbling comfort of imagined superiority. By late afternoon, the hearing concluded. The crowd dispersed, but whispers remained. Journalists hovered outside, hungry for statements. Naomi exited through a back corridor, her escort close behind. That night she drove again, this time without rain, without noise. The city seemed to exhale with her. She parked by the river, stepping out into the soft wind. The verdict she would deliver tomorrow wasn't just a sentence. It was a message. She thought of the generations before her, the ones who had stood in courts not as judges, but as defendants for crimes of existence. She thought of the marches, the laws changed, the voices silenced. And she thought of how far she'd come, how far they all had. Justice, she realized, isn't measured by punishment. It's measured by transformation, by what the guilty learn when stripped of excuses. As she stood by the water, Naomi whispered a line her father once told her before his passing. "When they go low, baby, you don't rise above them to be seen. You rise above them to stay clean." Tomorrow, she would do exactly that. The morning sun broke through the courthouse windows, casting long golden beams across the marble floor. The building, usually humming with routine, carried a quiet tension today, as though the walls themselves knew what was about to unfold. Naomi arrived early, robe draped over her arm, heels clicking in a rhythm of calm defiance. Outside, the press waited. Their cameras flashed as soon as her car door opened. She didn't flinch. To them, she was the headline, the judge who faced her attackers. To her, she was simply a woman doing her job. In courtroom 2B, the seats filled faster than usual. Lawyers, clerks, and curious onlookers gathered, drawn by the story that had already become legend in whispers. The defendants sat side by side, Ellen pale, Mark rigid, both looking as though they'd aged decades overnight. The arrogance that had once fueled them had drained away, leaving only the raw fear of accountability. Naomi entered, and the room rose. "Court is now in session," the bailiff announced. The gavel struck once, a sound both final and ceremonial. She began reading the summary of the case, her tone measured, steady, stripped of emotion but full of authority. The defendants, Mark and Ellen Porter stand charged with misdemeanor assault, aggravated by evidence of racial intent, she began. The evidence includes surveillance footage, witness testimony, and the defendant's own admissions. Mark's jaw clenched. Ellen gripped his arm tightly, eyes glistening. Naomi continued, each word deliberate. This court acknowledges the defendant's lack of prior record, as well as their claim of remorse. However, this incident reflects a pattern far more dangerous than physical harm, a pattern of dehumanization, masked by civility. The room fell silent. Her voice grew softer but sharper. Every day, people are told in 1,000 small ways that they don't belong. In a parking lot, in a classroom, in their own neighborhood. This court will not treat such acts as harmless frustration. Words matter. Intent matters. Humanity matters. Ellen began to cry openly. Mark looked away. Naomi's gaze never faltered. The law exists not only to punish, she said, but to teach. She paused, long enough for the weight of the silence to settle. The courtroom seemed to hold its breath. Therefore, she said finally, this court sentences the defendants to 6 months of community service, including mandatory participation in the Diversity Restoration Program, a public apology recorded for civic education, and probation under supervised behavioral review. Gasps rippled across the room. Some expected harsher punishment, others leniency. Naomi leaned forward slightly, her voice lower now. This court also requires that both defendants spend 100 hours volunteering at the City Legal Aid Center, where they will assist individuals facing discrimination claims. You will learn the weight of what you tried to diminish. Mark opened his mouth as if to object, but Naomi's gaze met his, calm, unwavering. It wasn't anger, it was truth. This isn't revenge, she continued. This is reflection. The kind you can't buy, evade, or silence. When the gavel fell for the final time, the sound echoed like a closing door. The case was over. The courtroom sat still, struck by the quiet power of what had just happened. Naomi gathered her papers, thanked the bailiff, and rose. As she stepped down from the bench, Ellen whispered something faintly audible. I'm sorry. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't rehearsed. It was small, shaky, human. Naomi didn't respond with words. She simply nodded once, acknowledgement, not absolution. Outside the courthouse, the crowd erupted in questions. Microphones were thrust forward. Cameras followed every movement. Judge Carter, what message do you hope this verdict sends? Someone shouted. Naomi stopped briefly at the steps, the sun glowing behind her. That justice, she said evenly, isn't about humiliation. It's about awakening. Then she walked away, down the same steps she had climbed the morning before, each stride lighter than the last. Inside the courtroom, the couple sat frozen. Reporters lingered, scribbling notes. The verdict had not destroyed them. It had demanded something more difficult. Change. Later that afternoon, when Naomi returned to her chambers, a folded note awaited her on her desk. No name, just 4 words written in uneven handwriting. Thank you for seeing us. She read it once, then tucked it inside her planner. Perhaps it was from Ellen, perhaps not, but it didn't matter. What mattered was the ripple, the moment when hate confronted by grace began to lose its voice. She sat for a while, letting the quiet return. The courthouse clock ticked softly behind her. She looked out the window again at the same parking lot where it all began. The asphalt now washed clean by yesterday's rain, and for the first time in a long while, Naomi allowed herself to breathe without armor. The courthouse emptied slowly that evening. Naomi sat alone in her office, the sound of footsteps fading down the hall until only the hum of fluorescent lights remained. She leaned back in her chair, eyes fixed on the fading skyline outside. The sun was setting, painting streaks of amber across the city she had served for more than 2 decades. For the first time in years, she felt something unfamiliar. Not victory, not pride, but stillness. The kind that follows a storm finally spent. She opened the note again. The small, unsteady handwriting. Thank you for seeing us. It rested in her palm like a fragment of something fragile yet sincere. Maybe it was Ellen. Maybe Mark. Maybe someone in the courtroom who saw, for once, the difference between vengeance and justice. Naomi folded the note carefully and slipped it into the back pocket of her robe, not as a trophy, but as a reminder that even the smallest reflection could start a change. Later that night, she drove home through quiet streets. The city lights blurred past, but this time she didn't replay the insults or the fear. She thought instead of every person who had ever been diminished by ignorance, every child told they didn't belong, every voice dismissed before it could rise. She parked outside her apartment and sat for a long moment. Engine off, listening to the tick of cooling metal. She thought of her father's words once more. You can't change what's in their hearts, baby, but you can make them look at what's in the mirror. That was what this case had become. A mirror, not just for them, for everyone watching. The following week, the story spread nationwide. News outlets ran the headline with 1,000 variations. Racist couple sentenced by black judge they assaulted. Some called her ruling too soft, others too symbolic. But none could deny its impact. In interviews, law professors praised her restraint. Activists debated whether grace was still enough. And quietly, thousands of comments flooded the courthouse's online page. Stories from people who'd lived through moments just like hers. One woman wrote, "For the first time, I didn't feel invisible." Another, "This reminded me that dignity is louder than hate." Naomi didn't respond to any of them. She didn't have to. Days turned into weeks. Life at the courthouse resumed its rhythm. Cases came and went, theft, fraud, domestic disputes. But every so often, Naomi would notice a shift. A juror's tone softening during deliberation, a defendant lowering their eyes in reflection rather than defiance. Small ripples spreading outward. One afternoon, Daniel entered with a hesitant smile. "Judge Carter," he said, "you might want to see this." He handed her a newspaper article. It showed Mark and Ellen Porter standing in front of a community center, speaking to a group of students about bias and responsibility. The headline read, "Former Defendants Lead Diversity Workshop, Inspired by Their Case." Naomi stared at the photo for a long time. Ellen's posture was uncertain but open. Mark looked uneasy, yet humbled. Growth, even in discomfort, was still growth. She placed the article beside the note. Two artifacts from one story. Proof that change doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers, quietly but persistently. That night, Naomi visited her father's grave. The cemetery was calm, lit by the last blush of sunset. She brushed the leaves off his headstone and knelt, the breeze lifting strands of her hair. "Daddy?" she murmured. "I didn't shout. I didn't punish. I just showed them." She smiled faintly. "You were right. You always said the strongest verdict isn't in the sentence. It's in what people do after they leave the courtroom." She stayed there for a while, talking softly, as if the wind could carry her words upward. When she finally rose to leave, the sky had deepened into twilight. Streetlights flickered on one by one, small points of light cutting through the dusk. Driving home, she passed the courthouse once more. The garage lights glowed, the same space where the story had begun. She slowed for a moment, remembering how it felt. The humiliation, the restraint, the decision not to react in anger. She realized then how full circle life could be, from being a victim in that space to transforming it into a lesson for the world. She smiled. Not because she had won, but because she had stayed herself. At home, she poured tea again, sitting by the same window where she'd once stared into the rain. But tonight, she wasn't alone in thought. Across the city, people were talking, in offices, in classrooms, around dinner tables, about bias, empathy, and what justice really means. And somewhere in that same city, two people who once saw her as lesser were now helping others see differently. That was enough. As the night deepened, Naomi turned off the light and whispered to herself, almost as prayer, "May the world learn, not from punishment, but from the reflection justice leaves behind." She closed her eyes, the city hummed steady in the distance. The story that began with hate ended with understanding. Not perfect, not complete, but real. because sometimes the most powerful verdict isn't spoken from the bench. It's whispered in the silence that follows, when the heart finally begins to change.